David Banica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, David. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great.
Good.
I wanted to give people some background on why we are having this conversation and how I've come across your work. And it was from a previous podcast guest, Roxandra of Daco Romana. And she had sent
Yes.
me a space that you all had done discussing Eliad, which I really
Yes.
enjoyed. And I know you all are doing it. It will be out by the time we finish recording this and this gets posted, but you all are doing a second space on that, which people should definitely check out on X and on YouTube.
Absolutely.
I will link your X profile in the description for people to go and
Thank
check
you.
that out. But before we get into anything else, I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, what it is that you do, and I wanted to explore a little bit of your background before getting into anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess what I do right now, well, I'm still an undergraduate at my university. I'm about to enter into my senior year. I'm studying towards a history degree. But what I do and what some of my my major passions in studying are a lot of comparative mythology and a lot of comparative religion, and this sort of spawned out of a hyperfixation with Indo-European linguistics. I originally wanted to go to university to study linguistics. I had designs for Prince Edward Island University in Canada to do stuff like this. Obviously, I ended up in Virginia, which thank God I did. I love Virginia a lot. But a lot of what my personal goals and a lot of what my personal studies focus on is a broader, I guess the broad term would be reenchantment. And that's a buzzword. A lot of people say it. I said it first. No, I didn't say it first. But I think to narrow it down more, in Western civilization, in Western culture, we have problems, and I don't mean this to demean Western civilization. I'm as much a product of the Enlightenment as you are, as anyone else is in the modern world. It's hard not to be. But I've also recognized how much we have lost. How much we've lost enlightenment, and even in the Romantic movement. Some beautiful things came out of the Romantic movement, but a lot of religious symbolism died off. And then I think a lot of the culmination of this anti-religious, anti-spiritual, anti-symbolic spirit, I think it all coalesced in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And for better or for worse, well, for worse, especially in America, this happened in the mainline Protestant denominations. And we've discussed a little about that, and we'll get into that some more. But sort of the main thrust of what I go for and what I look for is this re-sanctification that I find especially in Eliad's work, bringing Western man back to these symbols and these values behind the symbols, these metaphysical truths. And this isn't a perennialist project, right? Mircea Eliade and myself, we're not saying that every religion has truth. That's simply not true. Especially for myself as a Christian, I consider Christianity to be the fulfillment of ultimate truth. However, there are common metaphysical patterns across religions that maintain modicums of truth, that maintain these kernels of truth that we've lost, especially in Western Europe, especially in North America. And I think, not an assimilation of these. I don't expect Lutheran ministers to, recite dharmic verses in during the liturgy. But I think just a reassimilation of the traditions of the world, why we have the traditions that we have. There are certainly places and peoples that just have traditions because, oh well, this is fancy and we've always done it and this is the way the world turns. But the meaning is lost. And when the meaning is lost, people like Kant and people like Hegel can do whatever they want with religion and with philosophy. If I was put in a boxing match with Hegel and Kant, that is essentially what I would like to do beyond just parsing words with the schools of thought they've created. I'd love to go head on head with them. And so I think I think especially Mircea Eliade, concept of the myth of the eternal return. I think especially in these postmodernist movements, post-liberal movements, in theology and spirituality, people are coming back. People are understanding that the world is suffused with spiritual meaning, and almost everything is religious by nature. Um, that doesn't always mean they're becoming Christian. We see people going into neo-paganism, and we saw in the 50s and the 60s, all throughout the 20th century and still today, the New Age stuff like that. Um, so I know that was a lot of different rabbit trails, a lot of different sidebars, but that's the gist of what I study, of what I do.
Yeah, and as someone who was swept up by the new atheist movement many years ago, and I still, and I've said this before, but I have, even though I disagree so much with many of these guys, I still have a lot of respect for the Christopher Hitchens and the Sam Harris and some of the
Yeah,
work that they've done. Especially Hitchens, he was so eloquent in the way that he was able to present his points and was an unbelievably great orator. But I found in a lot of philosophy that I've been reading after Kant, you mentioned Hegel, Heidegger would be another one, Nietzsche, obviously. I am continuously frustrated because it's like 1,001 ways to be wrong in interesting directions.
yeah, yeah,
It's why, especially, and I don't want to repeat myself too much because I've talked about this probably in 5 or 6 episodes now of the podcast, but it's why I keep going back to much older philosophy. Like, I've got Socrates behind me, so the dialogues that Plato wrote down, Saint Augustine, who would have been a Neoplatonist, things like that, because it seems that that's
yeah.
closer to that which is ultimately true, which we find obviously in Scripture. But before diving into any of that, you're not originally from America, is that correct? Am I getting that right?
No, no, I'm Romanian.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about, can you, how do I segue into this? Um, Most people know the name of the country Romania because that's where the popular influencer Andrew Tate is from. Most people don't know
Well,
about the. Yeah, I know. I have to bring that up because then I can clip that and
yes,
it'll
yes,
it'll it'll look good in the blurb. Um, but people don't know the traditions and the culture that comes from not just Romania but Eastern Europe. So I'd like to know first, how did you go from Romania to America? But then, what are some of the traditions that you're carrying over from that country to the United States?
yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Andrew Tate is a ghoul. The man is not Romanian. Citizenship and being Romanian are two different things. But we have that out of the way, so I'll
Yeah,
answer your question.
I
So
had to mention that.
my Yeah, no, 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 no. You're good. You're good. So, interesting story, actually. I've lived my entire life between America and Romania. So my mother came to America as a Protestant missionary after the fall of communism in Romania, and my father was also Protestant at this time. He had grown up Eastern Orthodox, um, but they met there, got married, they lived there, came back to America, had me. I have American citizenship. We went back. Da 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 da. So that's really the gist of it. But I grew up. I did not grow up, in the Orthodox Church, but I grew up in an Orthodox background. Very very friendly to that sort of thing. And Romanian Protestantism is not friendly to Eastern Orthodoxy. Not even a little bit. I mean, they very much consider it goes both ways. They very much consider each other, little antichrists. Now, I am certainly not that way. That is not my persuasion at all. And I grew out of a lot of that. But in terms, I guess, of the traditions that I've brought over with me, and sort of the things that are very important to me, um, just this kernel within Eastern Europe, this philosophy of religion that seeks to understand religion by itself, not as, and Eliade does a lot of this, and this was his goal with the history of religions. It's very much a manifestation of how Eastern Europeans think about religion and about philosophy. Um, at one point in Western Europe, theology was the queen of the sciences, and all of the other sciences pointed towards her. And I think, for better or for worse, because of the influence of the Eastern Orthodox Church, because of the various Eurasian empires, I'm thinking here of the Golden Horde, of the Ottoman Empire that dominated Eastern Europe. There was, and this isn't an excuse, this isn't, self-victimization, but we spent a lot of effort and energy fighting off these people and just surviving. So I think a lot of Eastern European philosophy obviously deals with these themes of survival, of thriving amid intense persecution, et cetera, et cetera. And, part of this is that a lot of Western ideas about religion during the Enlightenment did not parse through. They really did not filter down. There are notable exceptions. There are Renaissance men. In Romania, one of the princes of Moldavia, Dimitri Cantemir, he was a Renaissance Enlightened man through and through. But also, reaching back deeper into Eastern European and Romanian history, during Christianization, it was a much slower process compared to the Western and Roman Catholic ways of doing missions work. And in many ways, the Eastern Orthodox way of assimilating local customs and traditions follows this idea that there is truth and beauty in the world, and we do not have a monopoly on it. Now, we have a monopoly on truth, as we have the gospel, as we have the sacraments, but that does not mean that there are not true, good, and beautiful things that are in local pagan customs. Now, this doesn't mean you accept the pagan customs for what they are. You don't go around dancing naked with goats in the woods on a Sunday, right? But you look at the deeper meaning. Why are they dancing with a goat in the middle of the woods? Why are there these symbols, these fertility rites? What is good about them? Because ultimately, as Christians, if there is something true and beautiful in the world, then there is a piece of God somewhere in there, or there's a piece of God's truth somewhere in there. And so I think that way of doing missions, and obviously this is not a total statement. There are certainly persecutions of pagans under Orthodoxy as well, par for the course. But I think especially when it comes to Eastern European religious thought, this remembering, and Eliade calls it cosmic Christianity, this folk Christianity that's still in tune with the liturgical calendar, that's still in tune with the festivals of both the church year, but also the rhythms of the season, are very much alive in the Balkans, in the Carpathian region, in the Baltics, in Eastern Europe, in a way that they aren't in the West. I mean, I believe, I'm trying to remember where this reference is from. I believe it's one of Eliade's books on Zalmoxis, but he records over three to five different cosmogonic myths that are outside of the Bible. Basically, how the world and how the universe was created outside of the Bible among the peoples of the Balkans and Eastern Europe. Okay, in Western Europe, in places like France and the Netherlands, zero. There's nothing beyond the biblical creation account, which isn't in and of itself a bad thing. It just shows you the extent that folk tales, folk traditions have been fully assimilated to Christianity. So when you fully assimilate it to institutionalized Christianity, which again I'm a part of institutionalized Christianity, but with the trajectory of it in Western Europe, that leaves it open to higher criticism, that leaves it open to rationalism and the ravages of the Enlightenment. To where the creative myth in Genesis is turned into superstition. It's oh, you believe in Genesis, that's based, that you're a backwards Turk, things that people would have thrown around during the Enlightenment period. So yeah, that, again, long-winded way to answer your question. But when it comes to things that I've brought over that are important to me and that I still remain in contact with, is this enchanted worldview, is this worldview that still sees God in everything.
And that's a great way of putting that too. It's an important nuance because as an artist, one of the questions that as a Christian as well, you have to wrestle with is how do you interact with the art, specifically art that's not necessarily Christian in its orientation. And if you're able to pull
Right.
out something that is true and that is good, that is beautiful, then you can still rescue the best parts of whatever it is that you're interacting with. So that's a great nuance, and I hope people remember that. Let's dive into the Substack article that I read that you had written. So let's start with just what is the New Age?
Oh man, what is the New Age? So that's a book, right? I have to write a book on that. But if I were to give you, an answer just for this episode, I would define the New Age as essentially a belated attempt in the 20th century, and really it has its roots in the late Victorian era. I would point at people like Madame Blavatsky, a Russian mystic who dives into Hinduism and Buddhism, and then sort of does her own thing where she discovers the perennial truths behind all religions, and really all religions are the same, and distills it into this really this clean and this sanitized theosophical movement, right? Very much an intellectual movement.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Could you define for people theosophical?
Oh man, can I?
For people who don't know, it's a wide audience. I just want to make sure that people are following along.
Definitely. So Theosophy is late Victorian esoteric movement, early 20th century, that it was started by a Russian Orthodox woman who obviously repudiated Russian Orthodoxy later in life, that basically saw inner, more fundamental truths in Hinduism and Buddhism, but instead of taking fasting, ascetic practices from Hinduism and Buddhism, it took more the secret revealed writings sort of thing. So you don't actually have to believe anything. You just have to sort of have good and high thoughts about humanity, about civilization. So you see how this leads into the New Age. And I think the New Age in the 20th century, especially, not a very intellectual movement. You might have celebrities and particular intellectuals getting into it, but to distinguish it from Theosophy, it's very much a popular spiritual movement. So people see these Christian churches, and they're not. It's like, well, I can get the same thing from church that I get from the Christian Science Review, or from the Smithsonian periodical. So why would I go to church? I need deeper spiritual meaning. So I'm going to go smoke something from South America and consult my rock crystals, or my guru, or my shaman Kyle from San Francisco, because these guys are tapping into these far Eastern roots. So part of the connection there is Eastern mysticism is more real than what we have in the West, simply because of the deep symbolism of these calming practices, right? A distilled and sanitized Buddhism doesn't ask a lot of you, so it's therapeutic. It's highly individualistic. You can believe whatever you want to believe as long as it makes you happy. That's what matters, right? So religious and spiritual experience has been dumbed down to I'm high and I'm happy, and that's religion. So why do I need to go into a church? They're all stuffy and boring, and they don't let me have sex with whoever I want to have sex with, right? And the mainline denominations caught on to this a lot too. And I keep saying mainline denominations in a derogatory way. I'm Episcopalian, so I see it as well. I see the fruits of this as well in my own denomination, where there's really a lack of, and I think this is changing. I'll say that I'm a very recent Episcopalian convert, confirmee, however you want to style it. But yeah, so the New Age, right? It's anti-intellectual. It's popular. It's sort of the opposite end of what you see in the Soviet Union, right? So communism is a Christian heresy. I'll just say it. You can have that as your blurb, as your what did that man say on David's podcast? But it is, you know, it has a salvific mystery to it. There is the abolition of history in it. There is the sanctification of human effort in it. Um, and I think, you know, I think the New Age response to that is, well, we don't have these political movements that sanctify history. You know, in some ways, we have the civil rights movement that makes my life worth living for, and then we have this New Age come about that sanctifies literally everything I do. Sex, well, it's tantric, so you know that becomes a sacrament. Drinking, smoking, well, that brings me closer to you know the Brahma, the universal underlying truth of everything, and really nothing matters, man. It's all interconnected anyways. We're all going the same place. And you know, I do make fun of the New Age because it deserves it. It deserves to be made fun of. It deserves to be left, you know, in the trash pit of history. But having said that, it it is a manifestation of a real spiritual anxiety that happened in the West. And we're still reeling from the consequences of that. I think, you know, part of it's not scary for me, but part of what worries me is that people are becoming more spiritual. And like I said earlier at the beginning of this conversation, but I fear it's going the wrong way. You know, I think a great mentor of mine brought this up. You know, in is it Robert Eggers, the filmmaker, Chris Eggers?
Robert Eggers.
His recent movie Nosferatu. Obviously there's an encounter with real spirituality, with these Orthodox monastics, with the vampirism in rural Transylvania in Romania, but it's not this turning to the sanitized Enlightenment Lutheranism. It's turning to those parts of Christianity that still retain mysticism. Not that Lutheranism doesn't, but Enlightenment Lutheranism, right? The context of which we're operating in. So in that vein, I think people are turning towards spiritualism, but I don't think that they're necessarily turning towards Christianity. And I think that Christianity has a lot of catching up to do. Now, that doesn't mean Christianity, turns churches into what people want to see. The job of the Christian minister is to have the church as something that people need, right? As a hospital for sick souls, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something that we're going to contend with. Going further into I think the New Age is over. I think that spiritual movement is over, and I think it's morphing back into legitimate organized paganism, legitimate organized mysticism of the non-Christian variety. And I think the job of the priest, of the minister, of the pastor in the 21st century is to deal with the ramifications of that. So that was more than just a definition of the New Age. I know that was a lot, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that's very helpful. There's a religion I've been seeing that's very trendy, and of course it's trendy in Hollywood because it's a very narcissistic religion. Are you familiar? It's called the Ba'i. I think I'm saying that correctly. Ba'i religion.
Right.
Yes, where it's like all religions have a little piece of the truth, and
right.
It's the analogy of the elephant. We are all holding on to a part of the elephant, but really the Ba'i, they see the whole thing. There's actually in your Substack, and I wrote this down because I wanted to read this, and I'm leading somewhere with this, but you say the profound narcissistic tendencies that radical expressive individualism inculcates have led to the breeding of I am my own God, everyone is their own God spirituality. With this pendulum swing to extreme individualism in the metaphysical and material, it remains to be seen what a swing in the other direction may bring. So,
wow, I'm such a good writer. I can't believe I wrote that.
It's a good line. I like that turn of phrase. You said you were Episcopalian.
Yeah.
And to kind of set the groundwork for this, I also am Protestant. And when we were getting ready to set this episode up, I had not knowing you were Episcopalian, I said half jokingly, but I'm not totally joking, I am a begrudging Protestant. Like I wish I could be Orthodox or Catholic, not just because it's a fad, or it's like, oh, it's like,
Yeah.
it's my style, but I want to be as ensconced in the truth as possible. And the only reason I'm not part of either one of those two camps is because I'm ignorant. I don't know enough about it, but also like there's things about it that's just like I don't know if that's true, and that stops me from uh, crossing that bridge, so to speak. And in Protestantism, what we're seeing, I think, is this sort of, how do I say this, infinite fractionation of mini MINI popes, where every church, and I'm exaggerating, but every church kind of does their own thing. They all have their own traditions, they all have their own creeds, and that continues to fractionate to the point that it's almost no longer recognizable as a church. Like if you see the mega churches, it's me and Jesus sort of coffee Christianity. I'm wearing my clothes from the
Right.
Gap, and we're going to go and we're going to spectate, and it's going to feel good, and then we're going to leave. And
Right.
it's very surface level Christianity. And in the extremes, and this is why I mentioned the Episcopalians, I've noticed a trend in extreme fractionation where it's not just in Episcopalian churches, but in Episcopalian churches, they're now having not only female pastors and priests, but openly saying we are pro gay and lesbian, and we're trans rights, and
Yeah.
like, whatever the most extreme liberal view is. It's like that's the stance we're going to take, to the point where the
Yeah.
Babylon the satire column
Yes. Yeah.
jokingly said, "Oh, Satan has now officially joined the Episcopalian Church," which I thought was hilarious.
He did a long time ago. He did a
Yes.
long time ago. That was a late article by the Babylon Bee. So I'd love to address that in its totality, and
Please.
it's a spectrum of this this extreme individualism. But I'll start with the Episcopal Church. The thing with this expressive individualism, this hyper individualism, is that it's not an Episcopalian thing. It's not true to the theology. The Episcopal Church prides itself on having sacraments first and foremost, on having apostolic succession. The sacraments are unitary symbols. They're real. They're spiritual, and they're symbolic. And these are shared. And we believe that they're shared across the Anglican Communion. We believe that whether they want to admit it or not, this connects us to the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. Is the sacramentology, and sacramentology, having a theology of the sacraments, does a lot to abolish this. It's between me and Jesus, man. Well, it's not actually between just you and Jesus. You have a duty and a responsibility to your fellow parishioner, to your fellow Christian. You have a duty before God, and it's pernicious and it's political as well. In the broad scope of Anglicanism, especially playing such a large part as it has, along with the Calvinist churches, along with the Lutheran churches, in the story of America, in the story of Great Britain, it's been subject to various political upheavals, to various movements, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a movement that really, it's not anything traditional to the theology. It's not found there. These movements for accepting anyone for any reason at all, they're political. They come from American progressive culture, from Western progressive culture that infiltrates the church, and it's also this ideology of, well, nothing really matters as long as we're being pastoral. Well, sometimes being pastoral means saying things that aren't nice, and that's something that goes the other way into the socially conservative megachurches. I'm sorry, Diane, you can't take the microphone and say whatever you want to say on stage. You're not ordained. You're not a minister of the Word of God. Do Protestants and other Christians believe in the universal priesthood? Absolutely. The priesthood of every man. But that's not the same thing as being a theologically trained minister. And the answer to that in those circles as well. The seminaries are all liberal and they're all captured. And be that as they may, we still have to have order. We still have to have hierarchy, because if at the end of the day you have social conservatism, but you don't have a theological backbone, well, then you end up like oneness Pentecostals. They're very socially conservative, right? They're extremely pro-life. They're anti same-sex marriage, but they don't believe in the Trinity. I'm not willing to give that up. And I think, especially for myself, being an Episcopalian, the Episcopal Church, the demise and decline of the Episcopal Church has been very, very much exaggerated. I do think that the Episcopal Church will lose more churches in the coming years. I strongly believe that. But they will lose the churches that don't proclaim the gospel. And I think that that'll be a pattern that you see across America and, across Western Europe. And I think another thing that no one likes to talk about I grew up as a charismatic Pentecostal. That was my faith tradition before I became an Episcopalian. And what no one likes to talk about is, one, how feminized the spaces are. A lot of charismatic Pentecostal churches are not friendly to males, and that's just the truth of it. You can disagree with me, you'd be wrong. I grew up in these firsthand.
Sorry,
and
that's well said. I'm going to steal that.
Sorry, I'm
that's great. No,
being
that's
a little
fantastic
bold today.
I love it.
I had my morning coffee.
Yeah, no, I hate interrupting, but that was great.
No worries. A lot of these worship spaces, and I go to an evangelical university. I have evangelical family. They're amazing. I love them. They're nothing like this at all. Their churches aren't like this at all. So it's certainly not a fast and hard rule. However, there is a predominant culture. I'd say especially farther in the American West and in parts of the American Southwest, where this culture is dominant. Less so where you have mainline churches that are still conservative, like in the American coastal South, parts of New England, in the Midwest, but especially in the American West and Southwest, a lot of these churches are very emotional, and it's because they recognize something that's been abandoned in a lot of Protestant churches, and that is the workings of the Holy Spirit. Right? A lot of churches act as if the Holy Spirit isn't our helper here on earth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything you do out of a genuine heart of spontaneity, like waving flags on a stage or speaking in tongues, right, for denominations that believe in that doesn't mean that it all comes from the Holy Spirit. That can absolutely come from you. And so there's this spirit of sort of, well, it's spontaneous. It wasn't bad. It didn't make me feel bad. So it must come from the Holy Spirit, and there's theological backing, etc., and it's fine, and God loves it. Wrong. That's wrong. You're lacking discernment. You lack as much discernment as someone who says that it's fine for 12-year-olds to be transgender, which it's obviously not, right? And obviously people go, that's a little extreme, David. It's the same individualism that is wreaking havoc in the mainline churches. And a lot of the response from the sort of mega church people are like, well that's religion. That's religious. That's the tradition is holding you down. When they have as many traditions, when they have as much religiosity as any mainline denomination, it's manifested differently, but charismatic churches have their liturgies. They do. It's in the order of their service. And those can become just as dead as a Congregationalist church's liturgy if it's not enlivened by by the witness of the church and by the witness of the gospel. And these are things you can't take one from the other, right? The early church was just churches or house churches. Okay, well the early church also believed that the Eucharist was the actual bread, the body and blood of Christ. Whether that was symbolic, whether that was spiritual, whether that was the Roman Catholic doctrine of real presence, who's to say? I'm not going to say it, but the early church practiced that, right? So there's always this appeal in mega church, evangelical and charismatic spaces of authenticity of what the first church believed. Well, then do it. You know what I mean? Then do it. Then have communion every week. have a bishop, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, these are all very controversial things to say, even among mainline Protestants. But and to answer your question, of being a begrudging Protestant, of not knowing whether to go to Roman Catholicism or going to Eastern Orthodoxy, you're going to run to another expression of the body of Christ to find the same problems. Now, I firmly believe that if you are in a church that doesn't work for you, that if you're an Anglican and you don't like the way Anglicans do church anymore, you disagree with our spirituality, I don't want to see you leave the faith. I'd be very happy if you became a Pentecostal. I'd be very happy if you became Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. But when you run from a tradition because you see expressive individualism, you're getting it everywhere. You're getting it in the Orthodox Church in America. You're getting it in the Roman Catholic churches in America. You're not going to outrun this. You're going to face different problems, but because this is a civilizational problem, it's going to affect our churches whether we like it or not, and we have to be strong. I've said many times, like, ecumenicism between branches of Christianity, that doesn't mean I have to believe you have all the right theology. But you and I agree that church is more than just one person sitting at home thinking good thoughts, or more than 5,000 people crammed into a movie theater all feeling really good and then going to get coffee. These things are fine. Feeling good is fine, right? But if you're not convicted by the gospel of Jesus Christ, which isn't a nice gospel, right? It's the good word. It's not the make you feel all bubbly inside word. Although it can, but it is life and death what we do in churches. What we proclaim in churches, what the priest, what the minister says in church is a matter of life and death. And we better start acting like it, because we're not right now. And that's why we see people flee to traditions that do act like it. Just over this past week, we saw Syrian Orthodox Christians being blown up for their faith, right? How many dead? 24 dead, I believe, in Syria. That's a matter of life and death. And I guarantee you they live and hear that every day. Whereas what we're worried about on Sundays in America, did that person feel a little, embittered when we said to take your hat off in church? That's the sort of things that we're worrying about. You have me ranting now, David. What have you done? This is your fault.
One of the ideas that I've been exploring, and now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I'm going to go back and watch this, and maybe we said it at the beginning, but I can't remember if we said this off camera, where you were talking about one of the migration issue that people are having to wake up to, especially as it pertains to Islam. I don't know if you saw, there is a mayor that looks like he's a mayor candidate that looks like he's going to be elected in New York City, who is explicitly Muslim. And I think I talked about this, can't remember which episode it was, but the downfall of the UK, what's happening with their immigration problem with Islam, and why these cultures are incompatible in many cases. One of the things that I've been trying to organize my thoughts on, and this is the perfect episode to do it, is what does it look like to reinstate a muscular Christianity? And when I say muscular, I don't mean like raw, ripping your shirt off, running in with a sword, although that's not necessarily a bad thing, but more of a unapologetic, no, we are Christians. Of course, this is what we believe, and we're going to follow through on it. This also pertains somewhat to the debate that's happening around Christian nationalism in the United States, where people have this, in my view, misunderstanding that the United States was attempting to be a secular nation. And they say that because of and it's not, this wording is not in the Constitution, although this law is, that there will be no religious test for running for office. And the reason that was the case in the federal level is because they did have religious tests at the state level. So it wasn't necessary at the federal level, because if you wanted to be a senator, if you wanted to hold office at a state level, you had to be, most of it was Protestantism, but I think there was also a Catholic version of that as well. And what would it look like for Christians in America to actually advocate for a an official statement from the government that we are in fact a Christian nation. I know in the UK they are technically a Christian nation, even though they behave secular. And then in the United States we have the
Right.
opposite, where I say we, writ large, the largest, we say that it's a secular nation, but it behaves quasi-religiously. So I want to know your thoughts on muscular Christianity and Christian nationalism.
Yeah. So I think, I'm going to be very careful with this because I think a lot of it comes from a good heart. I think a lot of it comes from like my world is falling apart around me. The public schools want my child to indulge in pornography, and then I go into the big cities, and all of a sudden, no one here professes the same religion as me. No one here is culturally the same as me. What's happening? And for better or for worse, call me what you will. That's a very natural reaction. Okay, that is a very human reaction, and that's a justified reaction. If I came into the middle of Mecca and I started building a church and I started insisting on the rights of Christians and insisting that Saudi Arabia take me on because Saudi Arabia is for immigrants and was built by immigrants, and therefore you must let everyone in, people would think that's ridiculous. And it is absolutely ridiculous. Now in America, we have a long and complicated history with this. We're for a very long time, we have not been ethnically homogenous. We have not been religiously homogenous. And I'm going to say something a little spicy here. I think a lot of the problems that we have with institutionalizing Christianity in America is that we did not have a Christian founding. And I truly believe that. And, this is that's not to say that that's a good thing. I think it's a bad thing. And a lot of the conservative Christian curriculum I grew up with, well, Thomas Jefferson was a deist and all these other people were deists and, they believed in God. And I'm looking at that, I'm like, that's terrible. That's awful. Why would we be celebrating that? A deist founding parts of our government, writing, having a huge hand in our founding documents. To me, that's a terrible thing. And other people saying that the American Revolution wasn't a revolution and it wasn't as bloody as the revolution in France, and really it was just the reinstatement of rights as Englishmen. Sure, certain factions truly believe that. I'm sorry, you were still shooting at ministers. You were still throwing ministers that were not pro-revolution out of your country. Churches were burnt down from New York to Georgia. I mean, that sounds like an anti-Christian revolution to me. Or at least, at the very least, if you don't agree with us, we'll kick you out regardless if you're a Christian or not, right? So I think those are some of the inherent problems in the Christian nationalist movement, is looking for an America that really wasn't there. Now later, especially in Reconstruction, we're constructing this myth, which I think is fine. I think foundational myths are great, by the way. George Washington, you can't touch that man. I truly believe that. Obviously, with other historical figures, I disagree, but those are my opinions, my views. Reconstructing this myth that all 13 states were, and they were majority Protestant Christian, absolutely. But the issue is that the founding class, many of the founding fathers, were not. They represented the intellectual elite of the Enlightenment. And that's why America is the first child of the Enlightenment. We are the first country produced by the Enlightenment. So you will have those problems no matter where you go. Now, in the American South, it's different. You have much more conservative laws regarding immigration and religion. And, obviously it shows even today with the Bible Belt that's entirely located in the American South. Religiosity in New England and the West Coast, with the Midwest being an exception to this, is abysmal. I mean, these places are unchurched. And then I think another problem with Christian nationalism, it's very niche, and it's guided by a lot of people that are, for better or for worse, Reformed Congregationalists. And I think it has a lot of particularly Calvinist theology behind it. from what I've read, from what I've looked at, Stephen Wolfe, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not extremely well versed on it, but I think that in many ways, if we want a Christian America, is party politics the way to do it, or is going back into the institutions the way to do it? Where are the big cultural disseminators? Is it really the on the federal level, or is it your local county election, or is it having a position as the curator of a local history museum, or is it having a position on the public broadcasting service and changing these institutions that have been completely captured by progressives, by people that are hostile to Christianity and to traditional values. But I think with Christian nationalism in America particularly, that remains an issue. And also, we're just not culturally homogenous anymore. 2 generations ago, sure, absolutely. But it's very, very hard to say that of America now, and that's a problem that's been baked into the founding. I think in places like Romania or even Sweden, where you have essentially culturally and ethnically homogenous countries, that's why Sweden has been so successful in their economic and political projects, and this is why the Orthodox Church in Romania had such an amazing rebound after communism. Having one of the largest revivals of any Orthodox church in Eastern Europe. So I think that's a problem for Americans. I also think the nature of Americans is anti-institutional. Obviously, this differs from region to region, especially on the East Coast. This isn't true, but you see that the farther west you go. I keep saying the West Coast. I lived in Washington for most of the time that I've lived in America, so I've seen this firsthand. So that's sort of my answer to your Christian nationalism question. Now, the answer to the muscular Christianity question.
And we might reframe that as masculine Christianity, muscular masculine Christianity.
Masculine. Yeah. Okay. So the obviously Christianity and Protestant Christianity has tensions within it. You have a tension between having a minister or believing in the the ministry of all believers, and you have a lot of paradoxes in Christianity. And what we've lost in the Protestant churches, which I believe very much has to do with the problem of not just women's ordination in the mainline churches, but in the evangelical churches, of having a very feminized worship service, or very, very feminized ministry, is that women go to church more than men. Just they do. Over American history, over the centuries. So this is why we have that, right? A lot of the people in the pews or in the chairs on a Sunday morning more than likely are going to be women. And this is why you've seen this phenomenon of like men versus women's retreats, and that's all great, that's all good. But a lot of this, it's tied to managerialism, and there's, not to sound like Curtis Yarvin. I don't want to sound like Curtis Yarvin. I don't. Yeah, that's a whole different podcast episode. But I think in a lot of ways, the hyper emotionalism exhibited in the evangelical churches has pushed men to the side. Men and women don't worship God the same. It's just the simple acknowledgement that our hormones are different, that the ways that we view the world are different. Not every man is going to be okay with a light and flag show on a Sunday morning, or a guitar circle of people singing Yeshua over and over and over again. Not that these things are inherently wrong or bad or untruthful, but they do exclude men in many ways. And I think academia has become a very feminized space. I think that literature has become a very feminized space. And to fix this, what does this look like? It happens in the home. And I'm not an expert on marriage. I'm married, but that doesn't make me an expert on marriage. I love my wife, and every day I learn new things, and every day I fail, and every day she fails and she learns something new. but a lot of American culture has shown or has given this image of the dad or the male as sort of a bum. He's kind of there. He's good to carry groceries in, but he doesn't do much other than that. And that's so harmful, and that's a massive propaganda effort as well. And I can't I couldn't tell you right now where it all comes from, where what the end goal of all of it is. But men have really been marginalized in that way. And again, this isn't to proclaim myself as a victim or proclaim victim mentality, but this cultural depiction of men in TV shows and movies, and the man, the very masculine man in Hollywood is the international super spy, right? The guy that sleeps with women and drinks, and that's he kills people, and that's his whole bit as a man. He doesn't have a family, he doesn't have time for that. He's too dangerous for that. Whereas the family man, the man that lives and breathes his every second for his son or his daughter. And like we were just talking about, you have a newborn baby, you would die for your baby. I know you would. And I know that not only that, you would kill for your child, your newborn child. And that's not something, the heroic nature of the family man is something that's been downplayed, that's been put to the side. I think this could be a byproduct of international peace, a byproduct of third wave feminism, whatever you want to call it, whatever diagnosis you want to assign to it. The reality is that it's there and that it's seeped into the churches in some big ways. So in the mainline churches, well, if you criticize something that a female priest does, well, you hate women. Well, no, I just think that maybe she could have said that different. Whereas in a different space as well, I'm not sure that I think she should be saying that as a worship leader. Well, the Holy Spirit can use whoever he wants. Of course he can. No one said that he can't. Obviously that he can. But that woman just said that so-and-so's mom died while she's, worshiping right next to her mom. Some, crazy stuff like this. And what does bringing masculinity back into the churches look like? It's a loaded question. It's a hard question. It's hard to look into the future because we're not there right now. And I think it's a problem with egalitarianism. Men and women, are we made equal in value? Absolutely. David, can you give birth?
I hope not.
Okay. Can you get pregnant?
Definitely not.
Okay. So you do not have the same abilities that a woman does, right? You are not equal in matters of giving birth, correct? You do not have the the same chromosomes that your wife does. This doesn't mean that you are not intrinsically of lesser value. This means that you were made differently. So of course, a different mode of being is what makes you move, is what it infuses your thoughts and your ideas and your feelings. And in American Christianity, we pretend like that's not true. We pretend in our democratic egalitarianism that everyone feels the same way, everyone thinks the same thoughts about Jesus, and everyone has the same notions. So that's a convoluted way of basically saying, I don't know what bringing masculinity back into churches looks like, or what it will look like, but I know that it's needed, or you're going to lose many, many, many more men to the spiritual ether.
Yeah, one of the, how do I say this? People aren't going to like this, but I'll say it anyway. I don't think that egalitarian. Actually, I want to be careful how I say this. In my experience, I have yet to see a great, healthy, egalitarian marriage where a man abdicates his role. Like you said, I love my wife; she's incredible. And watching her give birth, I mean, that was just a brutal endeavor. She did it naturally,
Oh, I'm
so
sure.
on all fours, no pain meds. It was just a bloody affair. That
Yeah.
placenta when it came out after the baby, I mean, it was huge. It was this massive. It looked like a liver. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. I was just,
Yeah.
and I was shocked at just how awful that was. So what I'm about to say is in no way denigrating to um,
No, no.
women, but men should lead. I love my wife.
Yeah.
When things have gotten intense, when we've been in financial trouble, when we've been even relationally, if there's, we don't fight, but if there's an argument, there's a big responsibility on my shoulders to lead us through that. We have a very traditional household. My wife does not have a job. Like I'm the guy who goes out so that she can stay home and focus on raising the next generation. And for
Yeah.
anybody who thinks that that's easy, like, oh, it's like, oh, I just stay at home and lounge around. It is hard to keep a house in
Right.
order. It is hard to, like, behind every great man there was a mother who was there nurturing and raising, and we all have our roles to play. And one of the things that I found frustrating in, and again, I say the church, I know it's not everywhere, I know it's not everyone, but especially when I see a pastor get up at a, so I should say I go to an Anglican church, so this is not a problem there. But in some of the mega
Mm.
churches that I've visited, especially when I've had to play cello for some of these places, I will watch a pastor get up in what looks like a golf shirt, Crocs, and skinny jeans in order to seem relatable. And all I can think is, in that moment, like, you are representing the word of God. You should look the part. You should dress well. You should put on a
Yeah.
jacket. You should look respectable. You should be someone that is attempting to model what leadership looks like. And as for masculine Christianity, one of the frustrating things that I see a lot of non-Christians who look at Christians, they see a sort of meek and mild Jesus. Oh, Jesus, meek and mild, and love everyone, and the golden rule, and it's a universal. And if you go and
Right.
actually read the stories, what does Jesus say? And you'll correct me if I get this wrong. I've not come to bring peace, but a sword.
Yep.
When he sees the synagogues have been turned into markets, he goes and he flips tables. I mean, this is a very masculine character to endure not
Absolutely.
only bodily torture but mental torture, and to persevere through that. That would, I think, be the model that we should all want to aspire after. And I would
Yeah.
like to, and I agree. I don't know how this problem is fixed writ large, but for individuals, I think it's for individual men, it's about not abdicating your role of manhood. Like, I don't need anyone to tell me to hold open a door. I don't need anybody to tell me to
Right.
work. I don't need anybody to tell me to defend. And in back on that idea of muscular Christianity, being unapologetic as a Christian, because I see a lot of, especially in college and in academia, especially, it's like, oh, well, this is what I believe. But if you think something differently, that's also completely valid and that's fine. And
Right.
oh, you're, pro-choice, I'm pro-life, but we can agree to disagree. And it's like, I understand, I'm not saying run around bashing people with a hammer. That's not
No, 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 no.
But at the same time, it's like, yeah, no, I am a Christian, and abortion is evil. And if you think transgenderism is legitimate, you're wrong, and I think that that's evil. And I'm saying
Right.
this not to bludgeon you. I say this because I want you to change, and I do believe I'm right. I like what you said earlier. It's like, people can disagree, but they're wrong, and I'm right, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I think if the church adopted that attitude, that would be at least a step in the right direction. I don't know if you agree with that, if there's anything that you want to nuance from that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, to start from the point of where we, talking about megachurch pastors and, wanting to feel relatable, right? Wanting to show that you're in the world but you're not of it. You're the cool dad. I get it. I do. I understand it comes from a good place, but that's going to leave you. I mean, that's the same spirit that's behind adopting the higher criticisms of the 20th and 19th centuries. Hey, it's cool to deny the virginity of Mary. It's cool to deny the virgin birth. It's cool to deny the Trinity. Let's all do it, guys. No. That you're leading souls to hell, and I'm not saying that's what megachurch pastors are doing when they dress like that, or when evangelical pastors do that. But people are looking for, what's the word? Not sanctity, not humility. Man. Anyways, people are looking for a more serious church. They're looking for a church that can answer the spiritual problems that can't be answered by Hollywood, that can't be answered by social media. So why would I go to a church where there's a big light show and a rock band? And again, using instruments in worship is not a bad thing, and having a social media presence at a church is not a bad thing. But when I go to a concert and then I go to church and I'm feeling the same things that I'm feeling in both places, maybe there's something wrong happening here. I don't know. Maybe there's a problem at this church. And that's where I have a problem with it. And obviously, it goes on the other side. You can have all of the beautiful vestments that you want. You can have the rightly administered sacraments. But if there's no gospel, if there's no Holy Spirit being preached on a Sunday, then it's just as useless as the spiritual experience of a rock concert. So it's not just like we were saying, it's not monolithic, right? It's not all evangelical churches, they're all rock concerts, they're all EDM concerts, and there's no actual gospel there. And all Episcopal churches and all PCUSA churches are Satanists with funny clothes on. But they're real issues, and they're real issues that we experience, that you and I experience on a daily level. So to your other point, especially in leading your wife, right, and being the head of the household. First of all, beyond just being like, if you read a few verses of the Old and New Testament, like this is really elementary stuff, people. But in academia, and I've experienced this even at my amazing conservative evangelical university. I really I like the professors a lot. I really like most of the students there. Mm-hmm. No one, and I mean no one, has had a good interaction with a female professor. Ever. Not even once. They've all been either very rude, very aggressive interactions, or just an unwillingness to lead a class, an unwillingness to assist with research. Very much this feeling of arrogance, of superiority. And the male professors, sure, do some of them have that? Absolutely. Have I encountered, interacted with them? But the vast majority are very nice, very humble family men who are leaders in and outside of the classroom, leaders in their church. And that's why a lot of academia is so hostile to traditionalism. And this happens, hey, guess what? This happens at your Christian universities. This happens at Liberty University as much as it happens at Yale or Harvard, right? There's this false identification with social problems in America. Well, they all come from the institutions. The institution is the evil part. No. It's the people in the institution. Are you really so craven that you think the building is the problem? I mean, it's ghoulish behavior to say that it's the building and not the people. Well, look at the people. Get the people out. It's still a Yale, Harvard. You can salvage these places. I truly believe. Now, I don't believe in the Reconquista or something so ill-advised and speedy as that. This is going to be a slow roll. But ultimately, institutions impact the culture the most. Like it or not, universities are here to stay. Now, I think they're going to be in a hybrid format. I think places like the University of Austin, Texas, Ralston College, I think they're the new face of universities and academia will look like. But the institution is not going away. Civilization is not going away anytime soon. It's our job as leaders, as Christian men and Christian women, to continue and remake these institutions in the way that we want them to be remade and seen in ways that are healthy, not just for America. And we should remember this. Everything that happens in America ripples out, whether we like it or not. Every social trend, every political maneuver, every bribe taken ripples out across the world. And we look at we look at Western Europe and we're like, wow, these French people letting everybody in and just throwing away their culture. Like, we aren't doing the same thing. Like, we haven't done the same thing. Obviously, it's much more pronounced in France. It's much more pronounced in Great Britain. But it's not unique to either of these places. And I think America, is much better off in terms of institutions. Not to be a parochial and prideful, Eastern European bumpkin, but a lot of Romanian publishing houses and universities in the Baltic area and the East in Eastern Europe, they do very well with these issues. They have very open, not just debates. And that's where I think in Western Europe, we're sort of like, well, I'll convince him to my position. No. We stopped that in 2015. The debates over abortion and over immigration, they've all been said. There's nothing new to say. It's just a matter of using institutional and cultural credit, of using power. Not to sound Machiavellian, but seriously, let's get our stuff together. And a lot of it revolves around men that don't want to be leaders. And, some of the stuff that I've said has been rehashed multiple times. Some people blame it on watching sports too much. Some people blame it on sports betting, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think these things are the roots of our problems. I think, there's harmful things in all of it. But I think that men who are traditionally minded, and I don't mean like people that scream at OnlyFans models on Twitter. I mean people that have actually built and gone into institutions and understand the power behind these things. It's going to be slow. Okay, I think the pace is picking up. I think good things are happening. I think people are excited. I think the tide is turning, but it's not all going to happen at once. And we need to be patient, because I think things done in haste, whether that's kicking all communists out of America, or something as simple as prosecuting abortion doctors. These things aren't going to happen overnight. There's going to be resistance to them, and we can't be afraid of knocking things around a little bit. We can't be afraid of, well, my neighbor doesn't really like it that I voted for so and so, and my neighbor doesn't like the church that I go. He's not comfortable with my yard sign for Easter. Move on with your life. There are bigger things to worry about than what your neighbor thinks of your nativity display around Christmas time. So yeah, to answer a plethora of questions.
The last question that I'm asking everybody for this episode cycle, this next 10 episode cycle, what is something practical that you'd like people to take away from this conversation? Or how can people apply this conversation practically?
I'm going to be really cheesy and really, really, really evangelical here, but pick up a Book of Common Prayer. Seriously, pick up a prayer routine. If you can spend 1 million hours a day on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, screaming to the high heavens, where's all the Christianity gone? Where's all of our tradition? Where have all the strong men? Start by doing that to yourself. Start by looking at the log in your own eye and not the splinter in your brother's. Oh, well, he vapes. That guy's a degenerate. Meanwhile, you haven't been to church in 6 months and you call yourself a traditional Christian. We need to, walk the walk and talk, not just talk the talk. And I seriously mean that. So I guess, I'll give you a few. How about that? I'll give you a few. So practicality, the first, prayer life, especially, for those that are Christian. For those that are not Christian, that want traditionalism, I invite you to the faith. That's one of the beautiful things about Christianity, is we're always welcoming new members. The doors are never shut. And I think, too, develop intellectual habits. Not everyone is built for an introspective intellectual life, right? Not everyone is built for academia. That's fine. You are built for the trades. Okay, that's great. find the civilizational building qualities in your trade. You're a carpenter, build something beautiful. And with that something beautiful that you just built, you just won a battle against what the evil that we fight against. Every little thing, this podcast that you're doing, okay? This is a work of truth and beauty and of bringing conversations that have been kept down for many decades into the light. That's a small battle won in a cosmic war. And I guess third is a lot of people, if you want to call them conservative, if you want to call them right wing, if you want to call them far right, however, in a lot of our circles, they abdicate human society. They're like, well, it's all gone to crap, so I'm going to go live in a cabin in the woods. That sounds nice. That's absolutely not what we are called to do, especially not as Christians. We're called to not forsake the company of the faithful, the assembly of the saints, and that might mean going to Boston and, I don't know, having coffee with a person you wouldn't have a coffee with, and having a conversation about this, right? So I think I think especially in your local community, like, okay, you go to work 30 minutes away, but you live where you live, get involved in the local community, because that's the way that the people that I fight against, the Marxists and the progressives, now remember, it's not the people, it truly is the ideologies that we're against here. But that might mean fighting people in battle of words and ideas in a podcast, right? Get into your local community, become a figurehead in your local community, become a pillar, do diligent work in the local community, because that's what these people did. Truly, they didn't just come in and start throwing words around and then all of a sudden everyone was like, wow, you guys are so different and smart and amazing. No, they did the groundwork. And because for so long, people of right-wing and conservative persuasions were like, oh, we have the institutions, that's why we lost the institutions, because we didn't maintain them. So yeah, those are my three takeaways, my three practical takeaways. They're all very slow though. They take a while.
David, Banica, thank you so much for your time. I suspect that this will be either really well received and popular, or people will hate it. I don't think there's going to be a sort of milquetoast warm reception.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to people watching this episode. I will include your X profile. Is there anything? Do you have a website or anything else right now?
You can throw my Substack in there. I need to post more on it. It's been a while, but besides Twitter, that's mostly what I'm active on.
Great. Well, I'll be sure to do that, and people should definitely check out your work. So I really appreciate your time.
Well,
thank you again.
I appreciate it as well. Thank you.